So Sheriff, why don't we start with the big burning issue, if you will. So many people are concerned because they saw the number of homicides, murders go up this year in Jacksonville. How do you feel about it? It seems like this is a crisis.
Yeah, in a word, you get frustrated with the challenge. But I'll tell you this: so we have, as we do every year, we take a couple of weeks and kind of take a 10,000-foot view and look at all of these cases and try to identify a driver. And really, what we saw this year were a couple of months where you've got spikes in activity, series patterns and trends in shootings and this type of violence in really areas that we had gained ground in the year before, in that northwest part of the city. So that drove the numbers this past year. So, what continues to be true, and we've said this over and over, is you have a small number of people. When I say small, I mean relative to our million people population, that really drive the violence in the community by victimizing themselves over and over again. So it's really a subculture of gangs and drugs who communicate using violence. Violence is their first go-to in any conflict resolution. And so that's ground zero, that's where we're working. So moving forward to improve that, I think we've got to get the community more engaged in what we're doing every day. And what I mean by that is we'll never have a policeman on every corner, but we can have the eyes and ears of the community getting us involved in some of these incidents before they become a shooting, before they are, we've done an appropriate response, I think, in terms of responding to this violence this year. I mean, the arrests are up over 9,000, clearance rates are up over 60%. So that part is okay, but you'd like to prevent some of these things from happening and disrupt it in the front end, and we need the community's help in that. So we're going to remind the community of the avenues that we have that they can engage with us, and then we're going to create some new ones and go out and incentivize those a little bit through a gun bounty program, some other things that we've done years and years ago, but it's been effective. So we'll roll those things out again and hope to leverage the community to help us in this.
Didn't hear you mention cure violence. I know that's something we've talked about in the past. Are efforts like that a waste of money, or is it just take more time, or how would you gauge the effectiveness of some of the things you're trying to do to bring down the violent crime?
So it's hard to measure what you prevent, at the end of the day. But I think if you look at our overall strategy, you've got, again, are we putting policemen in the right place at the right time, and are they doing the right type of thing? That's part of it. The technology that we brought on board, ShotSpotter, NIBIN, the work out of the Gun Crime Intelligence Center, is that proving effective? Cure violence, that's a pretty innovative strategy. It's pretty cutting edge. I'm a fan of cure violence. I think that work is important, but it's not. None of these standalone will solve the issue. I think it's a combination of all these things together, and staying focused on it for the right amount of time. Now the question is, how long is that? We don't have an answer to that. I mean, we just continue to monitor, look at the progress. If you have several bad years, you're going to have to readjust a strategy a little bit. But at this point, for this year, I think our goal is to be consistent in what we're doing. So all the tech is working together finally. We'll evaluate staffing to see where we are in terms of, do we have enough policemen out there doing the right things at the right time, that type of thing. And are these, the strategies from the National Network for Safe Communities, Cure Violence, is that stuff having an impact? Let's let that work a little bit and see, and then we'll make those determinations, down the road. But I think right now it's about being consistent. We've seen enough success with these programs to know that they can be effective. And so we'll take a look at, are we implementing it the right way? Have we checked all the boxes in terms of this implementation? Are we doing what we need to do to sustain these efforts correctly? And so once we do all that, I think it's about consistency at this point, and we stay the course for now. But again, what makes me comfortable in saying that is we've seen enough success to say, yeah, these things will work. You got to give them time.
There are going to be people, critics if you will, in our community who say, that's not good enough.
Sure.
If it's not working, if the number of homicides or murders is going up, then why would you keep doing something because it doesn't seem to be effective? What do you say to them?
Well, listen, I think you're going to have, and if you look over the last several years, if you look over the last 20 years, you got numbers that roll based on what you're doing in the community, what we're doing in terms of not just engagement, but our enforcement activity, all of that. So I think that 1 year is a very small, narrow snapshot of looking at success. I think you've got to, looking at crime trends is typically a 3 to 5 year window. Has it been effective? I mean, I'll use Oakland as an example. Oakland had about a 40 to 50% reduction in homicides. That was a lot of effort over about 7 years. And not just from law enforcement, from the community, from prevention efforts We talk about investing in young kids. That's important when you talk about a 5, 6, 7-year window that you're looking at. So, we will be out in the community talking about, sustaining those prevention efforts, being very critical of what we're doing, no doubt about it. But at this point, staying the course of what we're doing. Again, we've seen enough to know these things will be successful, and then just continue to monitor that to make sure that we're, again, doing the right things, enough of it, doing more of what works, less of what doesn't, and staying focused on that.
My intention is not to insult you.
Sure.
I know sometimes people run campaigns or they say we're going to do this. I'm going to be tough on crime.
Oh yeah.
Are you being tough on crime, or is this when you see these numbers that concern so many people, is that being soft on crime?
Yeah, and I think there's a third category. I think you have to be smart on crime at the end of the day. So, we've done, if you look at overall crime numbers since 2015, the community overall is down almost 10% in crime. We've intentionally focused on violent crime because we think it's important. It drives numbers for the community. And so we've spent a lot of time and effort there. We'll continue to do that. I'll do that until the day I leave. We'll be focused on working on that. It's a long-term challenge, there's no doubt about it, but we want to have success there. We're going to continue to focus on it, and it's obviously, in my mind, a worthwhile effort.
Let me ask about body cameras. I know this was thought through before even doing a trial program. So here we are, there's maybe some criticism coming now on, hey, when are we going to see more from the Sheriff's Office in terms of body camera video? And there's a case recently where folks are saying, we want to see that body camera video. Where do we stand on that?
So look, just to take a step back and talk about the program in general, so every officer is wearing a body camera now. We've got all that implemented, catching a lot of great footage. Remember, that footage is evidence. So in particular, we talk about police shootings. That's where most of that call for let's see the body camera footage comes from. So remember, in the first phase of this investigation, it's a criminal investigation on the police officer. So it's like any other criminal investigation. And that body camera footage is one piece of evidence that we kind of pull together. It's a different kind of case. It's not a whodunit. We know who the players are at this stage of the game, but it's a pulling facts together. All those facts are delivered to the state attorney. The state attorney's office is involved in the gathering of those facts. So they're running a concurrent review and investigation as we do. And then that determination about whether or not there's been a violation of law is made by the state attorney. And so like any case, we don't talk about the steps and the evidence, and we don't try our case basically publicly. We collect the evidence, the state attorney makes that determination. If that officer is charged, he's charged, and all that evidence will be public record at some point during that criminal investigation. If he's not, that case comes back to us, and then we do an administrative review. Did he violate policy? And just as a reminder, our standard is higher than state law. So we're going to be very critical of what that officer did. All of that process is an internal investigation that's protected by state law. So we can't release that at that point. At the end of that investigation, all of that footage will become public record. So there's an appropriate time where it will be released. We haven't had body cameras around long enough to be able to have that, run through a full cycle yet, basically. So when it's appropriate, we will. Now, we've talked a lot about with the state attorney's office. Remember, at the initial stages, this evidence belongs to them as well. So, Melissa and I had a lot of conversation about if we are in a position in this community where we feel like releasing that body camera footage is going to save us from having some kind of issue, an incident or unrest, then we'll talk about releasing it. But really, 99% of the time, we're not going to release it until we're able to by state law. And then, again, if we are in a situation where we feel like we should, we'll have to have a conversation case by case on when we release that footage, how we release it, who sees it. Releasing it, does releasing it mean showing it on television, or does releasing it mean showing it to the family? So there's a lot of conversations you got to have when you get to that point. So again, we'll consider it, but at this point, we want to stick with following the law in terms of the video.
Let's talk about a state law that's recently enacted, Marsy's Law.
Sure.
This has been enacted in other states, but now it's here in Florida. Broadly, how do you feel this has impacted what the Sheriff's Office is trying to do in terms of taking care of victims,
Right.
but also solving crimes?
Right. So I think, again, the initial, the catalyst of Marsy's Law is to protect victims. I mean, I think everybody agrees with that. The implementation of it and the interpretation of it sometimes has been a little rocky. We've had some challenges here in the interpretation of it. We are always going to fall to interpret it to protect the victim. So we'll always be on that side of the equation. In terms of how it's impacted us in solving crime, we haven't done we talked about this just a minute ago, but we haven't done a calculation to see, our clearance rates are up. I wouldn't say that's because of Marcy's Law that they're up, but they're certainly not down at this point. So that may be a study that we can look at in a couple of years to see, have we seen any kind of negative impact. But day to day, I haven't heard that from investigations. I haven't seen it myself. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, the implementation of Marcy's Law is something that you've got. It's different around the state, depending on what agency as the way they've chosen to implement it. So we'll continue to monitor that too, and if we need to make changes, we will. But right now, I think we're in a solid position legally, and it's not impacting the investigations, and we are protecting victims in these cases.
So community members, if it wasn't my house that was robbed, or my next door neighbor is the person who was, that
Sure.
violent crime was committed against, I feel left out of the loop. I feel like I want more information. I want to know who to keep my eyes out for. Is it creating a disconnect there? Because we've talked about how important it is
Right.
to you to connect with the community.
That's right.
If you can't connect with the community and say, here's the suspect, or here's what really happened, because we're trying to follow this law, isn't that?
Right. Well,
hurt?
again, I think you've got to. It could. I think you got to be creative in the way that you've got to work to protect victims and be creative in the way you share that information with the community. So you've got to be able to get information out. That's correct. But you also have to do it under the umbrella of you got to protect the victims and follow the law. So again, that's what we're doing here. And you see a little bit of variation of that around the state. But I think most people are in that same lane of let's default to protecting the victims and work as much as we can on sharing information with the community.
One thing I wrote down here, it seems like there's an expansion, at least from our view, because now even people who are involved in car accidents, we won't get an identification on, and some things like that. So this is coming almost directly from our assignment
Sure.
editor saying,
Yeah.
hey, what's going on here? Is this your call, or is this an interpretation from the Office of General Counsel here in Jacksonville?
So there's a state interpretation. There's some of it that we create here. So as a new category arises, and you guys have a question about it, I would encourage you to reach out and let's talk about it and see. So some of that we may default to based on what we've seen somewhere else. Sometimes we have a big discussion about it and say, yes, we're going to add this category, or no, we're not. And so I think you'll see maybe some impact from the legislature coming up, maybe not this session, but in future sessions, about how do we streamline this and make it clearer for everybody and kind of have a blanket interpretation of what this means. But again, the intent is that we are protecting victims in the way that we share information with the community.
Bottom line, what was 2019 like when it comes to what the Jacksonville Sheriff was able to accomplish?
Yeah, good question. So I think I leave 2019 frustrated, obviously. I think there are things that we can do better. I think there are things that we can draw from the community to help us, be better as a community. And so we've got to just work on that. I think, we roll out of 2019 into 2020 focused on the work, and we got to stay that way until we see the results we want to see.